Hey guys, it's Generalkidd here. How's everyone doing today? So, as you all may recall, I recently announced that starting this year, I'll be branching out to more kinds of content on this channel. Some of it covering more Halo stuff, some of it covering other games, and some of it covering obscure tech. So, for today's video, to kick off the new year on this channel, I'll be doing all three in one video. So, what I have here is a very obscure smartphone called the Hisense A5 Pro CC. What makes this phone unique is that it has an e-ink display, particularly a color e-ink display, as its main primary only display. This is the same kind of display that's used on like Amazon Kindle e-readers. If you've used the Kindle e-paper reader or e-ink reader before, then you're probably familiar with these kinds of displays, and you're probably aware that not only are most of them black and white only, but the refresh rate, even for just turning pages, is pretty atrocious. So naturally, we're going to see what it's like to do some gaming on this display. I'll talk a bit more about the details on this phone and its display while we're testing games on it, but I also plan on doing a full review of this phone in a separate video as well, so I'll save most of the fine details for that video. With that in mind, let's get right into some gaming, starting with the Master Chief Collection, Halo MCC. Okay, so before you rush to the comments and ask how am I playing Halo on a smartphone or any Xbox games, well, the answer to that is I'm using xCloud to stream these games on a cloud. Well, officially it's called Xbox Game Pass streaming now, but you get the idea. It surprisingly works very well on this phone. But anyways, as you can see right off the bat, the experience is pretty bad. Scenes with darker lighting are simply hard to see on an e-ink display, even with color and the brightness turned up. Brighter areas look alright though, and I can at least make out more details. But if I were to play really dark missions like Nightfall and Halo Reach, it'd probably be unplayable. Perhaps if you played games in high contrast modes, it might actually work pretty well on an e-ink display. But also, if you've noticed the gameplay being really choppy, I can assure you that's not the camera recording this. In fact, this footage is recorded at 60 FPS too, so you can better see the choppiness. It's so choppy not because the game or the cloud streaming is running poorly, but rather because the refresh rate of e-ink displays is pretty bad, and not meant for gaming or even video viewing. So this phone actually has different settings for the refresh rate of the screen that also affects the quality of the image. The clear setting that you can see here produces the highest quality image and reduces ghost images in the background, but it's also the lowest refresh rate. That means playing a game on the clear setting is effectively like playing Halo as a PowerPoint presentation. The only setting that's somewhat playable is the speed setting, which is what we've been using this whole time. So, is Halo MCC playable on an e-ink display? The answer is not really. The choppiness alone is too much for any kind of smooth gaming experience and is not what I'd consider playable. Halo 3 isn't even considered a fast-paced shooter game, so in a much faster-paced game like Call of Duty, it will really be unplayable on a screen like this. Okay, so FPS games are clearly not ideal for an e-ink display, but how about something completely different like a racing game? Well, let's try my current favorite Forza game, which is Forza Horizon 4. So personally to me, this game kind of looks like a racing game from the 90s on a display like this. The screen doesn't have the resolution to make this game shine, not that it would really have mattered on an e-ink display. There also doesn't seem to be enough colors on this display to really make cars and the scenery shine either. But aside from that, the game doesn't look that bad on the screen. The downside, of course, is still obviously the refresh rate of the screen. Xbox Game Pass cloud streaming performs pretty well these days, and you usually won't notice much input delay, but the refresh rate of the screen pretty much cancels that out and pretty much simulates input lag, even though there isn't actually any input delay. This is honestly what drunk driving is probably like, so I'd say 3D racing games like Forza are not playable on an e-ink display either. But perhaps watching replays or spectating races might be an interesting experience on this display. It'd be almost like watching a medium quality GIF on Twitter or Discord. Both the quality and refresh rate of the screen for this game pretty much answers the question of what if an entire game was just a GIF. Okay, so modern 3D games are clearly not ideal for an e-ink display, but how about some classic 2D games? Well, let's test it out on PacMan. So the first thing I want to point out is that the game actually has a more classic feel on an e-ink display than it would on a modern OLED display, or dare I even say a CRT. The colors of this e-ink display, while not as vibrant, actually works pretty well with a game like PacMan. It's unique, in my opinion. It's different. That being said, this game is still not quite playable either on this display. Once again, that's because of the refresh rate causing a sort of simulated input delay, which is something that would negatively impact even a game like PacMan. So, sadly, even PacMan is too fast-paced to be truly playable or ideally playable on an e-ink display. So if not even a classic 2D arcade game like PacMan is playable on this display, then what is? Well, let's simplify the games even further and just do a 2D puzzle game like Pego. So Pego is actually a bit more interactive compared to some other 2D puzzle games, but as you can see, it's actually quite playable compared to other games. The game has enough colors and contrast to see things clearly too, so any puzzle game like this, slower paced ones, is probably the most ideal for a display like this. Simpler mobile games like this, or like Candy Crush and stuff like that, would definitely be fine too. However, one issue you might possibly hit is if the game is too dark or doesn't have enough contrast. That might make the details of the game hard to make out, but aside from that, I think you should be okay with slower paced 2D puzzle games like this. So that might be the only thing that's playable on this display. Alright, so now that you've seen our tests, to answer the question of whether you can actually use an e-ink display for gaming, well, the answer is mostly no. Yes, you can technically play games on this display, but I would not recommend it. It kind of works for less intensive games like 2D puzzle games or simple mobile games, but for fully interactive 3D games like shooters or racing games, it's not a pleasant experience at all. It's not even that there's too much input delay or something. The performance of the device or the cloud stream is actually quite good. But the problem is the display itself has too low of a refresh rate. So faster paced games are just way too choppy to be pleasantly playable on any current e-ink display. Now, to the credit of e-ink displays like this one, they've improved a lot since the early Amazon Kindle days, to the point where we now have e-ink displays on smartphones with color and a refresh rate high enough to be somewhat usable for most basic tasks on an Android phone, like web browsing and just reading the news and stuff like that. However, for gaming and even watching videos, it was obviously never meant for that stuff. But despite that, you might be able to get away with some light, simple games, just not complex 3D games. So that wraps it up for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and found it to be interesting. I've got a lot more obscure tech and gaming videos in mind for the future, so any feedback on the format or what you'd like me to cover more in future videos, it'll be much appreciated and a huge help. So thanks again for dropping by, and make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with all of our latest videos, and I'll see you all next time.